I apologize for the song problem, but that's okay. Not the end of the world. And my clicker's not working today. This is just one of those really, really, really fun days. Really fun days. Okay. Now, technically, chapter 10, which is what we will be covering today, doesn't fit the criteria of our studies of non-writing prophets because there's nothing said in this chapter specifically about prophets. However, this chapter is the fulfillment of commands or prophecies, whatever you want to call them, given to Jehu by both Elijah and Elisha. So I felt like that was criteria enough. And I want to give you one more disclaimer. I get a lot of information from commentaries and other biblical sources, such as study Bibles, Bible dictionaries, and so on. Most of the time, I copy and paste the information. Well, I always do that. And sometimes I quote the source, but sometimes I don't quote the source, and there's not a reason for that other than, I'm rolling along and doing the prep and all of that. And I don't set out to plagiarize, but I guess I do somewhat. But this isn't a doctrinal dissertation. It's a Bible study. So I guess I feel a little less guilty, but I wanted to mention this to you. I'm not trying to plagiarize. I don't want to take credit for what these other sources say. It's just that when I'm working on preparing a Bible study, it's just I'm going 100 miles an hour. Now, on the other hand, I'm quite sure that most or all of you know I'm not that smart, or I'm not that well read, so this probably isn't much of a surprise to you all that I'm saying that I get a lot of my sources from information from other sources. So enough said on that. We're going to begin today with one of the prophecies, or one of the, I don't know really what to call this. Let's call it a prophecy for now. In 1 Kings 21, I believe this is Jeremiah saying this. Behold, I will bring evil on you and will utterly sweep you away, speaking to Ahab and also by extension his father Omri. I will cut off Ahab, every male, both bond and free, in all of Israel. I've got a thing that cuts off part of mine. There. And I'll make your house like the house of Jeroboam. If you remember, God had the house of Jeroboam destroyed so that no descendant of Jeroboam would sit on the throne of the northern tribes ever again. And he says, I'll make it like the house of Baasha. Did the same thing. Because of the provocation with which you have provoked me to anger, speaking back to Ahab, and because you have made Israel to sin. Well, Elisha says something very similar. Well, I'll tell you, nothing's working today. Now, Elisha the prophet called one of the sons of the prophets and said to him, and this is, I hate to use the word interesting because I know I use it too much, but Elisha sends someone on this job rather than doing it himself. He says, gird up your loins, which is, pulling up his robe so he can run faster. Take this flask of oil in your hand and go to Ramoth Gilead. And when you arrive, I want you to find Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat. That's not the king of the south. This is a man named Jehoshaphat, who was the son of Nimshi. And go and get him to go in another room with you. And I want you to take the flask of oil and pour it on his head and anoint him and say, thus says the Yahweh, I have anointed you king over Israel. And then hit the road fast. Get out of there. And then in 2 Kings 9, he's talking to Ahab here. To Jehu. You shall strike the house of Ahab your master, that I may avenge the blood of my servants the prophets, and the blood of all the servants of Yahweh at the hand of Jezebel. So he's adding the crimes of Jezebel to the crimes of Ahab. And he says in verse 8, I'm wiping out your whole house. Ahab your descendants are gone. They're not going to be sitting on the throne. And he says in verse 9 the same thing that he had said earlier to Elijah. I'm going to make your house just like the house of Jeroboam and the house of Baasha, who no longer sit on the throne. So the events in chapter 10, while they don't specifically mention a prophet, it's all about what the prophets told their servants that was going to happen. So this chapter begins with the slaughter and I mean slaughter. This is a bloody chapter. It really is. It begins with the slaughter of the descendants of Ahab. But okay, here I'm gonna show the timeline that Mark gave us. But many of them were probably grandchildren of Omri that were not necessarily children of Ahab. Because if you look on here, you've got right here, and I'll explain this in a minute, but you've got Omri, the father of Ahab, Ahab, the father of Ahaziah, Ahaziah, the father of Joram or Jehoram, and then you've got Jehu stuck in there, who's not of this family. So when it says the children of Ahab, it's talking in a broader sense. Now, as I said, I get a lot of material from a lot of different places, and I don't mean to plagiarize, but here's a compilation of articles from several sources that I got. Bible commentaries, Wikipedia, and I know we don't need to trust Wikipedia. You need to check out your source. The Encyclopedia Britannica, Biblical Archaeology, and so on. And here are some of the things that it says. King Omri, right back here, was the 6th king of the northern kingdom of Israel. Jeroboam the first, and then Nadab, and then Baasha, and then Elah, and then Zimri, and Timri. You had all of these men ruling, some for a long time, Jeroboam the first, and Baasha, and then these guys didn't last very long. So despite his precarious ascension to the throne, Omri ruled for 12 years before his son Ahab succeeded him. Now, you'll notice that I messed up. Oh boy. This thing's going to be sensitive today. I hope y'all are not sensitive. Well, what on earth? I'm just going to come down here. Okay. You'll notice right here in this little square, you have Timni and Omri. The reason that both of those are in that square is that neither one of them, at least initially, had the clear reign of the northern tribes. Timri didn't last as long as Omri did. Omri and his army, if you will, took took Timri out. So, but as has been said before, once Omri became king, it says Omri did evil in the sight of Yahweh, worse than any of the others before him. Now, Omri's reign began amidst turmoil. King Elah, as you can see here, didn't reign very long. He reigned for 2 years before he was assassinated by one of his officials, Zimri. Okay, so we have Elah, and then we have Zimri who killed Elah. And when the Israelites heard of Zimri's plot against Elah, and they proclaimed Omri the commander of the army, they claimed that he was the king of Israel. But not everyone wanted Omri to be the king of Israel. The people of Israel were split, and they were split between Timni and Omri. Half of them rallied to Omri, but the other half preferred Timni for king. So you'll see in the timeline that Omri and Timni are reigning at the same time. But Omri took care of this. He and his men laid siege to the capital city at that time of Tirzah. It wasn't Samaria, and it wasn't Jezreel. At that time, it was Tirzah. And upon seeing this, Zimri ran into the palace, set it on fire, and killed himself. So Tibni died, and Omri became king. Okay, so here we are, right in where's my mouse? Right in here. Okay, so Omri ruled for about 6 years, but he ruled in Tirzah. But during his reign, he purchased a hill called Samaria. And it was an easily defended natural stronghold because it was high. And if you know anything about the military, the army that has the high point has the advantage. So Samaria, that Omri purchased, remained the capital of Israel for as long as Israel lasted. Now, when I'm saying Israel, I'm talking about the northern 10 tribes. And you can see the yellow that goes over there. When it gets to Hosea, I'm not sure how you pronounce that because it has an H in it. That's the end of the northern tribes. They get taken into captivity by Assyria. But Omri built a palace in Jezreel in addition to Samaria. And it was sometimes used as the capital. You know, whenever, let me just give you an example. If the president of the United States is in Air Force One, then Air Force One is whatever they call it, President number one. I forgot what they call it. But if he changes to the helicopter, it becomes whatever number one. Okay. Well, this is what's happening with Samaria and Jezreel. Depends on where the king is. Okay, so now we get down to Ahab, Omri's infamous son, and he went on to do even more evil in God's eyes. So the dynasty begun by Omri lasted 4 generations. Ahab, Ahaziah, Joram, 1, 2, 3, 4 counting his. Okay. Before God judged their wickedness and brought an end to the line of Omri. And some say the end of Ahab, but I go back to Omri. So the dynasty that was destroyed by Jehu, in my opinion, is the Omri dynasty, beginning with Omri's only son. Okay. Now, at this point in chapter 10, Ahab has killed 2 kings. In chapter 9, we found where Ahab killed King Joram, shot him with an arrow. he was the son of Ahab, but Jehu has also killed Ahijah, the king of Israel, who was up visiting Ahab. And we're going to find out that this did not please God. It's a little bit later in this studies. Big mistake, huge mistake, because it was the catalyst of something that happened many, many years later, which is right here, the Assyrian captivity. The killing of Ahaziah, the king of Judah, by Jehu was the catalyst that ended it all. Of course, the worship of pagan gods and so on was too. But anyway, there was no reason for Jehu to kill Ahijah. And as we go through this chapter, we're going to find out he wants to kill everybody. He would have wiped out the whole nation, I think. He really enjoyed killing people. And that was part of what either Elijah or Elisha commanded, the part about killing the descendants of Omri or the descendants of Ahab, whichever way you want to look at it. And we're going to see in a scripture in Hosea in a minute that shows God's displeasure for this act. Jehu's plan is to kill anyone who might get in his way to claim the throne, or those who might want revenge for the deaths of their family. Maybe they don't want to be king, but they want to kill the guy that killed granddad or that killed dad. Jehu also killed government officials, priests, family friends. They're all slaughtered. I mean, all of them are slaughtered. And I'm going to jump forward and then I'll come back. In 2 Kings 10 verse 11, it says, so Jehu killed all who remained of the house of Ahab, all his great men, his advisors, so on, his acquaintances, killed his friends, killed his priests. Now, these were not priests of the Almighty God. And he left Ahab, or Omri, if you want to look at it that way, without a survivor. Now, the IVP Bible background, and before anybody asks, I looked all over the place to see what IVP stood for, and I never found it. So if anybody knows what that is, please feel free to jump in. But the IVP Bible background commentary says this, and this is kind of a generalization. Leaving any living relatives of a king who had been forcibly deposed by assassination was an invitation to civil war. The relatives would be honor bound to avenge the death of the previous king. And that's easily understandable. And they would be certain to find those who would support. Yeah. Okay. They would be able to find others who would support them in the bid to regain the throne. Such annihilation of ruling families was common practice both in Israel and in the Near East. They would wipe out anyone who might get in the way of the new king. Now, in verse 1, somebody needs to turn their mic off, please.
Caller one. Caller one.
Caller one. Okay, please turn your mic off, please. Says now Ahab had 70 sons in Samaria. Notice Samaria. Okay, and Jehu wrote letters and sent them to Samaria. Now let me interrupt myself here. Is the number 70 literal? Could be. Maybe not. many of them are probably grandsons and maybe even great-grandsons of Omri and grandsons of Ahab, because Ahab ruled for like InterVarsity Press. Susan says it might be. I don't know. Okay, so it's Omri's dynasty that's being wiped out. And this is my opinion. This is what I've gathered from all of this. His dynasty began 48 years earlier. How many children and grandchildren did Omri have that aren't mentioned? He only had one son, Ahab. I think not. It's possible. But then Omri reigned 22 years. Ahab reigned, 22 when Ahab reigned, 2 when Ahaziah reigned. He didn't last long. And 12 when Jehoram reigned. And this is the dynasty of Omri. It lasted 48 years. 12 years for Omri, and strangely enough, Omri died of natural causes. I'm like, wow, this guy, the worst king in the north, died of natural causes. But Ahab reigned for 22 years, and he was killed by an arrow, I believe, shot by Jehu, shot him through the heart. Ahaziah fell down through the lattice work and was injured, and ended up dying of his injuries. And then Joram reigned for 12 years. He also was shot with an arrow. So that's 48 years that the Omri dynasty lasted. Jehu then had at least 112 men killed. 42 of them were from the south, which really got him in trouble with God. And they were simply coming up to see how their relatives, Jehoram and Jezebel, were doing, not aware of the coup that was going on. And I don't know if you ever saw the movie A Bridge Too Far. There was an English, I'm going to call him a general, Montgomery, I believe was his name, who wanted all of these bridges taken. And at the last bridge, his men were just slaughtered by the Germans. And his comment was, well, I think we just went a bridge too far. And so I'm going to use that cliche and say when Ahab killed the king, the descendants of the king of the south, which, by the way, may have been David's descendants, if you think about it, it was a bridge too far. They were just coming up to check on what they call the Queen Mother, which was Jezebel. And it's kind of offensive to call her the Queen Mother, but that's okay. And God wasn't at all happy with the helter-skelter killing of anybody Jehu considered a threat. He had specifically told him to wipe out the family of Ahab /Omri. And that's what his command was for Jehu to do. That's not what Jehu did. So in the first part of chapter 10, we read that he sent letters to the remaining leaders of Samaria. Now remember, he's already killed the king who would have reigned in Samaria. So the ones that are left in Samaria are his lieutenants and his Secretary of State, or whatever you want to call it, and so on. And he wrote him a letter, and he said, I want you to choose from the strongest of Ahab's sons and make him king. Now, Jehu is a little manipulative, as we will see going forward. He didn't want one of Ahab's sons to be king, but this was the way he was going to be getting rid of more of Ahab's descendants. After King Joram was killed, the leaders in Samaria had no leader. Their king was dead, and they feared for their lives. Now, I had a map. Here we go. At this time, Jehu is at Jezreel, but the capital is at Samaria. Now, here's Jezreel right here, right in the middle of this, okay? And Samaria, the city, is right here. See, we're talking about the city of Samaria, not the country of Samaria. Okay, so I thought I'd throw that map in. So Jehu, it turns out, is a master manipulator. He had taken hold of the army in Jezreel, but not in Samaria. He didn't have a stronghold in Samaria. He did have a stronghold in Jezreel. So there was a chance that one of Ahab's descendants would get control of the army in Samaria.
Yeah, they did.
And come for him. So he took advantage of the fear in Samaria, knowing that he had already. All right, I'm sorry. I'm gonna stop somebody.
Oh, whatever it is. Just one of those.
Colorado. There. Okay. Please, everyone, keep your microphones off unless you want to add something to the Bible study. Okay. So he took advantage of the fear in Samaria, knowing that he had already dispatched 2 kings and they were scared to death. So chapter 10 begins this way. Now, Ahab had 70 sons in Samaria. I've already talked about that. They were probably some of the descendants of Omri also that were not Ahab's sons. And Jehu wrote letters and sent them to Samaria, to the rulers of Jezreel, the elders, and to the guardians of the children of Ahab. He sent letters everywhere. Okay? Ahab's 70 sons may have included his own children, and I'm sure it did. But it may have included Ahaziah's children. He'd reigned for 2 years. He could have had a couple of kids. Jehoram's children. He had reigned for 12 years. He had children. And then Jehoram's children. I'm sorry, I said that already. He reigned for 12 years. And even great-grandchildren of Omri. So Jehu wants to wipe out all of them. All rivals to his kingship. And the rulers of Jezreel were Samaritan officials. They were from Samaria, but they had come over to the summer palace. And they often visited the royal palace, if you will, in Jezreel. And so you can see how his letters manipulate. When I show you one of them here in just a second, his letters manipulate the rulers of Samaria into doing a dastardly deed. It says, going back to verse 1 again, Ahab had 70 sons in Samaria, and Jehu wrote letters. In verse 2, he says, hey, look, guys, when this letter comes to you, since your master's sons are with you, who are they? Ahab's sons. And some of them are in their 20s. Since your master's sons are with you, as well as, you got the army, you got a fortified city, you got weapons, select the best and fittest of Ahab's kids. And that could have been, and also Omri's kids, we don't know. And set him on his father's throne and fight for your master's house. He's beginning to manipulate. His first letter was written in order to determine who might be the greatest risk. Pretty smart. I'm gonna write a letter to these guys. They're gonna put somebody in charge, and he's the one I know I have to go after first. The deaths of Joram and Ahaziah that we read about in chapter 9 were fresh in the rulers' minds, so their response was a fearful submission to Jehu's power. Verse 4 says, they feared greatly. And behold, the 2 kings did not stand before him. How in the world are we going to make it? Jehoram and Ahaziah didn't make it. They couldn't stand before Jehu. So they capitulated. to Jehu's leadership. And by the way, that's my word. I did not have to get that out of a commentary. They capitulated. They gave up. And they said basically, whatever you want, Jehu, we're with you. Verse 5. And the one who is over the household, he who is over the city, the elders, and the guardians of the children. Okay, so these are all of these leaders that were in charge since the king Jehoram has been killed. And they said, we're with you, Jehu. Whatever you want, man. You're our guy. All that you say to us, we will do. And we're not going to go out here and grab one of these young men and make him a king. You're in charge. Do whatever you want. Well, this all happened pretty quickly. And so Jehu sent a second letter. And he gave them a bloody command. And they went through with it. Then he wrote a letter to him a second time, said, okay, if you really are on my side, here's what I want you to do. I want you to get all of Ahab's kids and come to me at Jezreel tomorrow about this time. But before you come, I want you to decapitate them. When the letter came to them in verse 7, it says they took the king's sons, they slaughtered them, 70 people, and they put their heads in baskets and sent them to Jezreel. You're kidding me. Wow. So when the messenger came to Jezreel and came to Jehu, they said, hey, Jehu, we got some baskets out here. We've got 70 heads out here. What are we supposed to do with them? And Jehu said, put them in 2 heaps at the entrance of the gate until morning. Now, it doesn't really say why he said to do that, but it had to be to strike fear into the hearts of anybody who might, okay, let's go to Jezreel and get Jehu. Wait a minute, there's 70 heads laying here at the entrance to the gate. I think, why don't we go back home? I don't think we ought to take on this guy. So, but here's where he manipulates a little bit more. In verse 9, it says the next morning he went out and he stood in the midst of all those heads and he said to all the people, you all are innocent. You didn't have anything to do with this. I conspired against my master and killed him. I killed Jehoram and I killed Ahaziah. I didn't kill these guys. Who killed them? And so he evoked the prophecy of Yahweh about the house of Ahab. And he said, all I did was follow the command of Yahweh through Elijah and through Elisha. I didn't kill these people. And he says, know then that there shall fall to the earth nothing of the word of Yahweh. In other words, everything that Yahweh says is going to come true. Which Yahweh spoke concerning the house of Ahab. They're dead. They're gone. For Yahweh has done what he spoke through his servant Elijah and Elisha, by the way. Next, now, Jehu's not through. He's just out for an afternoon stroll. He's just a nice guy. All he's done so far is kill 2 kings and have 70 men decapitated. Nice guy, right? That's who you want to have over for dinner. So next, Jehu killed not just the descendants of Omri and Ahab, but anyone else he felt might be a threat to him. And the slaughter had just begun. First, it was the 2 kings, Jehoram and Ahaziah. Next, it was the 70 children and grandchildren of Omri, Ahab, Ahaziah, and Jehoram. I'm putting some of my words in this. Now he moves on to the servants the leaders, the priests. Now, when I use the word priest here, we're not talking about the priests of the one true God, of Yahweh. These are pagan priests. It said he killed, servants, leaders, priests, and friends of Ahab who were staying at Jezreel, which is where Jehu is at this point. But his taste for blood is just beginning. Verse 11. So Jehu killed all who remained of the house of Ahab in Jezreel, and with all his great men and his acquaintances, his priests, and he didn't leave him with a single survivor. Prophecy fulfilled, right? He did what he was told by Elijah and Elisha. Now, maybe the great men acquaintances of priests might have been a little bit of a bridge too far, but I wouldn't think God would have had a big problem with that. But anyway, so Ahab has done Jehu has done what God wanted him to do. Then in verse 12, like I say, we're not through. We're going to be killing people all over the place. Then he arose and departed and went to Samaria. Okay, it's only like 50 or 60 miles, not very far. On the way, he ran into some other people. I'm like, oh, those poor guys that got, that Jehu ran into. And these were relatives of Ahaziah, the king of Judah. Remember that. He's killed the family of the kings of Israel. God didn't tell him to kill any of the kings, any of the cousins or in-laws of the kings of Judah. He just told him to work with Israel. But it's very possible here in verse 13 that some of these were descendants of David. Jehu met the relatives of Ahaziah, king of Judah, who he had killed, and said, "Who are you guys?" And they said, well, and apparently they don't know at this point that Jehu has killed Ahaziah. Well, we're the kinfolk of Ahaziah, and we've come down to greet the sons of the king, that would be Jehoram, and the sons of the queen mother, because they don't know anything about what's been going on. And so Jehu said, I want you to take them, and I want you to kill every one of them at the pit of Beth Eked, 42 men, and he left none of them. So look at all the people that Jehu has killed so far, and more of them are from families that God did not tell him to kill than were from the families that God told him to kill.
So, hey, Skip.
Yeah, Mark.
I think you could put it in the context that these things of doing these things to the kings and people of Judah was an act of war. It just wasn't some murderous exhibition. It was an act of war. I mean, killing the family of the rulers of the neighboring country, that's an invasion and war.
Yeah, that's a great point. I had not thought about that. But
wasn't this done in a self-political for Jehu? It was outside of what he was really supposed to do, according to the prophet.
Yeah, and I think Mark's right. I think that Jehu may have been planning on invading the South. I think you're right. It was an act of war. Several acts of war. I mean, he just went crazy killing people. But yeah, I think you're right, Mark. Thanks. All right. So Where did we?
Uh,
Yeah.
So do you think he was trying to reunite Judah and Israel, or?
The scriptures don't tell us. I think what Mark is saying is correct. Uh, I think he wanted to be the king of, and I think you're exactly right. He probably wanted to be king of Israel and Judah. And so he's taken everybody out of the way that might cause him a problem, which is an act of war, as Mark said. And
Yeah, think about the intimidation and fear that would have been reigning every place that he appeared. Jehu rolls into a city, you better hide, because he basically just slaughters everybody.
and he
Another thing we might even think about is there could have always been collateral damage, so to speak, and other people killed that just weren't in these specific numbers of groups, sons and kings and relatives and that sort of thing. There could have been, what about the servants of the king's family, etc. Now, maybe not, but that's possible. Guy seemed pretty indiscriminate in who he was. In one way, it was very discriminate. In another way, it was anybody who's in my way is slaughtered.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. And I would think that there would have been friends that went on the trip. Hey, Charlie, are you going up to see Jehoram and Jezebel? Yeah, well, I think I'll tag along. I mean, one thing we need to remember, and I'm glad Mark brought that up, these are human beings. These are people that do the same things that we do. And you have a real good friend that's going on a trip. Hey, I think I'll go with you. That's not. I don't think that's hard to see. So I think you're right, Mark. There was collateral damage. Okay, so left none of them. I gotta find my place. There he is. Okay, now this is I'm glad Michael's not here because I'm going to use the word interesting. Well, my wife's here. She hears it. She hears it more than Michael does, but more than you all. But we're going to jump for just a second to Hosea 11 because God gives Hosea a message as a result of all of this stuff Jehu is doing. In Hosea 11:1, and I've combined the chart. Thank you again, Mark. With the scripture in Hosea 1:1, says the word of Yahweh, which came to Hosea, the son of Beeri, during the days of Uzziah. Okay, here we go. He names southern kings, which I thought was very, I can't say interesting, very unique. Why does he name off Hosea is a prophet for the north, not for the south. But it says that God sent Hosea a message during the days of Uzziah, right here in the south, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, during the days of Jeroboam II. Now, if you look at all of these, hang on a second. If you look at all of these kings of the south that he named, look how much farther they go out than just to Jeroboam II. So while Hosea doesn't mention him, all of these other kings right here were also in the days of Hosea. I think, all of you can see that. You got all of these kings down here, and they go well past Jeroboam. Okay, all right. If you look at the timeline, Hosea's time as prophet would also include several northern kings, such as Zechariah, Shallum, Manaam. I can't even pronounce these guys. Anyway, it goes all the way out to King Hosea, which would put Hosea as a prophet toward the very end of the northern tribes of Israel when Assyria conquered them. However, if you look, it appears now. Look down here. The prophets to Israel are the black or blue lines with the yellow in the middle. It stops just short. So I'm betting that Hosea died before the captivity, or was not taken into the captivity, based on what we're seeing on this timeline, which I think is great. Mark, thank you so much for showing that to us. All right, so it's this mass bloodletting that's the basis for Hosea's prophecy. Years later, with the symbolic name for Hosea's first son. If you remember, well, we'll just read it. The beginning of the word of Yahweh by Hosea. Okay, so God has sent Hosea a prophecy. And Yahweh says to Hosea, I want you to go and take a prostitute for a wife. And she's going to cheat on you too, we find out later on. But anyway, God is giving them a metaphor, analogy, metaphor, whatever you want to call it. Go and take a wife of whoredoms and children of whoredoms, for the land has committed great whoredom. What land? Well, the land of Israel, departing from Yahweh. And he's talking about the northern tribes at this point. So he went and he took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, which conceived and bore him a son. Now, what does he name his son? Yahweh said, name him Jezreel. Now, boy, that should ring a bell real fast for us, because it was the summer capital, if you will, for the northern kingdom. And he says, because in a little while, I'm going to avenge the blood of Jezreel upon the house of Jehu, and I will cause to cease the kingdom of the house of Israel. This is the first, I believe, comment that God has said, I'm taking them out. I've had it with them. I'm done with them. They've worshipped Baal. I'm not going to say Baal anymore, by the way. We're all used to Baal. You know who I'm talking about. They've worshipped other pagan gods and so on. In verse 5, it'll come to pass at that day that I'm going to break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. Here we are again, back talking about Jezreel. And Hosea's wife conceived again and bore a daughter. And God said to him, call her Lorahama. I don't know how to pronounce it. For I will no longer have mercy on the house of Israel, but I'm going to take them out. I'm going to utterly take them away. So the name that Hosea uses, the two names, becomes a reminder to the current ruler of Israel, Jeroboam II, a descendant.
Hey, Skip,
Yeah, Jim.
on this thing, I'm going to send you afterwards. I'm going to cut this up into 4 pieces and send it to you, and that way we might be able to see it clearer.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying? Then like you'd have that first quarter where we're on now, and it'd fill up your whole screen.
Well, I can do that, but I wanted the scripture on this one too. But okay, yeah, sure. I'll take a look at it, and if I can understand it,
Yeah, you'll get it anyway. Just look for an email later.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Skip.
Yeah, Barbara.
Skip.
Yep.
That verse 4, Is that where they become the lost house of Israel?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. The Assyrians come down and capture them and take them to who knows where. And I really mean that. Who knows where? God knows. That's it. Okay. Now here's something that Expositor's Bible commentary.
I think there's something else that we should maybe notice, and it's probably self-evident, but I'll go ahead and make the point. The previous, where he said he was going to take away the house of Jehu. Okay.
Oh, well, this one.
No, that next slide. Next slide. Yeah. So he says he's going to take away the house of Jehu and will cause the kingdom to cease. I think the point that's being made here by Hosea is that the blood of Jehu is going to be avenged, but the house of Israel is still in trouble because they didn't turn back to God, and therefore any of the following monarchs and their history and their leadership is going to be wiped out also, because the following kings, I don't believe, were sons or descendants of Jehu. Correct? They were from other families.
That's correct. That's correct. Well,
So it wasn't just who's going to avenge the blood of Jehu, or who's going to avenge the blood of Jezreel on Jehu, but the whole country is still going to be taken away.
Yeah, one thing though, let me throw in, and maybe we hadn't come to it yet, but God, no, we haven't come to it yet. God says or a prophet says to Jehu, all right, you did a little bit of what I wanted you to do, but you didn't do everything. But because you did a little bit, I'm going to let you have 4 kings, and that would be Jehu, Jehoash, and Jeroboam the second. So those 4, well, 3 of them are descendants of Jehu. But anyway, go ahead. I mean, we'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah, I think, and then I just think this is descriptive language about the end of Israel. And in verse 5, then he just plainly says, I'm going to break the bow. That's a archer's bow of Israel. In other words, the military strength that you depended on in the valley of Jezreel, which is a playback on what Jehu did in killing the men of Jezreel. He's going to destroy the whole military strength of Israel right there.
Yeah, that's a good point. I said bow. I should have said bow. You're right. It is, and it's talking about the armor.
Could it have anything to do with Josiah? Because he dies in the valley of
Jezreel.
Jezreel, yeah.
Well, Josiah's from the south.
Okay.
So
I think Josiah just made a huge mistake getting mixed up with the criminals in the north.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting that as we go forward in this thing and all that we've seen and read, that's a big problem for the kings of the south, that they make friendships with the kings of the north. They shouldn't have anything to do with them at all. But that's another subject.
Josiah brings them to his Passover celebration.
Right. Yeah, Josiah was
kind of interesting.
Yeah, he was a good king. And he was from the king of Judah, which every once in a while the kings of Judah were good guys. There weren't any good guys in the kings of the north, unless I know this is going to sound crazy, and we'll see in a few minutes that Jehu did something good. he did something real good. It was still violent and bloody, but he did something good. And God said, way to go, Jehu, but I have somewhat against you. And we'll get into that a little bit later. So here's what Expositor's Bible says about this, all of this. Although Jehu had done well in carrying out God's directive, he had sinned in killing more people than God had intended. And we've already seen that. The punishment for Jehu's sin, and I'm going to add something that expositors didn't add, and the sins of the people. I mean, the people aren't worshiping Yahweh. The people aren't worshiping the one true God. So the punishment for Jehu's sin was the cessation of Israel as a nation, which occurred about 722 BC. We see that in well, it's a little bit too small because I got the scripture on here. I think I show it again in a minute. Anyway, okay, so we're now we even have future prophets that are talking about this mess that Jehu has caused or created. But guess what? Jehu's not finished. He's got even more people to kill. I mean, you would think you would think he'd go home at night and say, "Oh, I tell you, I am so tired of killing people. I'm so tired of seeing blood. I think I'll quit." No, not this guy. Verse 15. Now, when Jehu had departed from there, he met Jehonadab, and I'm going to talk about this guy in a minute. The son of Rechab, coming to meet him, and he greeted him. He says, "Hey, good to see you." I can't help but think they knew each other. And he says, is your heart right as my heart is with? In other words, are you agreeing with everything that I'm doing? And Jehonadab said, "Yeah." And Jehu said, "Well, then climb on in." And he gave him his hand and he took him up. And he said, "Come with me and see my zeal for Yahweh." And we're about to see what Jehu calls his zeal for Yahweh, which may actually have been something that God wanted done. But anyway, so he made him ride in his chariot. And then he came back to Samaria and he killed a bunch of more people, anybody that remained to Ahab in Samaria, until he had totally destroyed Ahab, Omri, according to the word of Yahweh, which he spoke to Elijah. In chapter 16, okay, so here's what, okay, I'm going to back up here. Jehu called a special convocation of the people of Israel who worshiped Baal under the pretense that he would sacrifice and honor Baal. It was to take place at the central temple of Baal that Ahab had built in Samaria. Okay, so they're back in Samaria. So 1 Kings chapter 16. And this is what I wanted to throw this in because this comment comes up again. It came about as though it had been a trivial thing for him, Jeroboam. I'm sorry, for Ahab, as though it had been a trivial thing for Ahab to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, that he married Jezebel. Okay, two different things here. As if it had been a small thing for him to do what the previous kings had done that had caused the northern tribes so much trouble, as if that had been a little thing. Didn't matter. It was such a small thing, as if it had been that small. He married Jezebel. which should tell us that marrying Jezebel was not a good thing. And we find out why. He went to serve Baal and worshiped him. Why? Because his wife brought Baal worship into the northern tribes. And he went so far as to erect an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he built in Samaria. And that's where he has invited.
Skip, could you back up one? No, it was, I think you went back to the one that has Ethbaal in it. 1 Kings 16:31.
That's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
That almost looks like this Ethbaal may have claimed to have been a god himself.
Yeah, he kind of, he did. He was the priest king in Sidonia. And I remember Mark talked about this a long time ago.
Okay.
But yeah, he was a priest king, and he was worshipped. You know, I remember that from 100 years ago.
I wish I did.
Not Mark, not that you're 100 years old. I apologize. Okay. All right. So here we're getting into something interesting. I can't say enough about this comment about Ahab walking in the sins of Jeroboam, and that being such a tiny little thing compared to him marrying Jezebel, who she and her father Ethbaal brought Baal worship into Israel. Okay, we've done that. Okay, so now here's kind of an interesting guy all of a sudden that just pops in. Jehonadab, the son of Rechab, who Ahab's driving his chariot down the road, and all of a sudden he sees this guy and he says, "Hey, you agree with what I've been doing?" And Jehonadab said, "Yeah, sure, whatever." And he gave him his hand and he took him up into the chariot. Okay. Every cult leader where is it? Jeremiah 35. I'm going to have to go here. Okay. I'm going to go here and then I'm going to back up. In 2 Kings 10:18, Jehu gathered all the people, all what people? Anybody that served Baal, anybody that worshiped Baal, any priest of Baal, anybody in any way connected with Baal. And he manipulated them, and he said, "Okay, look, you think Ahab served Baal? He's not going to compare to me." So all of these people, yeah, Jehu and Baal, here we go. So verse 19, now summon all the prophets of Baal, and this is in the north, all of his worshipers, all of his priests, don't miss a one. For I have a great sacrifice for Baal. Whoever's missing is not going to live. You know, you leave somebody out there that's a Baal worshiper, going to kill them. Because we're not going to kill anybody in this convocation here. We're not, we're here to worship Baal. But Jehu did it in cunning so that he might destroy the worshipers of Baal. And this is what I was saying a little earlier, that Jehu did do one thing that God didn't frown upon. Well, two things, counting killing of Ahab's descendants. And Jehu said, you all, okay, we're going to have a party. We're going to have a big celebration. We're going to have a church service. And we're going to worship Baal. And the people bought into it. Sure. We love it. Then Jehu sent throughout Israel, this is the northern tribes, and all the worshipers of Baal came. Why wouldn't they? So there was not a man left who did not come. There was not a single, and I don't know if this is hyperbole or not, whether it was there was not a man left. You know, is that hyperbole? I don't know. But anyway, they all came.
I suggest it is hyperbole, because the very next sentence said they filled the house. Well, how big was the house?
Yeah.
To take every worshiper of Baal in the whole country? I don't think they built superdomes back then.
No. They did build some pretty big coliseums, but this was apparently inside a building. But I agree with you, Mark, that it probably is hyperbole. You know, when God says it's not, and boy, I'm getting off here. It's not my wish that any should perish. There's a little hyperbole in no, I'm sorry. God doesn't want anybody to perish, but when it says something like all Israel shall be saved, there's probably a little hyperbole in there. And I don't know why I got off on that subject, because I've just made an idiot out of myself. So forget I said that. But yeah, you're right, Mark. I mean, I think you're right. And so Jehu said, set up a solemn assembly for Baal. And then Jehu sent throughout Israel, and all the worship of Baal came, so there was not a man left. Here's hyperbole. And when they went into the house of Baal, it was full from one end to the other, standing room only. And he said to the one who was in charge of the wardrobe, I don't know what the deal is there, but anyway, bring out garments. We're going to put garments on all of these worshipers of Baal, probably so they'll know who they are. So he brought out the garments for them. And then Jehu went into the house of Baal with Jehonadab, here's this guy again, the son of Rechab, and he said to the worshipers of Baal, make sure there is not any servants of Yahweh in this house. Only the worshipers of Baal. Make sure, search, go look. And that might be why they were, you know, the robe bearer came out and they put, are you a worshiper of Baal? Oh, here, we'll put this on. Are you a worshiper of Baal? No, I'm not. Okay, well, I'm not giving you a robe. You know, that may have been what was going on here. Okay, verse 24. Then they went in to offer sacrifices and burnt offerings. Who's they? The worshipers of Baal. Now Jehu had stationed for himself 80 men outside, and they had swords and spears and, you know, all kinds of killing instruments. And he had told them, if you guys let anybody escape from this that's a Baal worshipers, you're going to die. So they were pretty careful to make sure that they weren't. Anyway, you get my point. Okay. Then it came about, as soon as he had finished offering the burnt offering, that Jehu said to the guard in the world that, now this gets kind of confusing. Did Jehu actually offer a burnt offering to Baal? I don't think so. He may have offered a burnt offering, but I don't think it was to Baal. But anyway, he came out and he told the royal officers, go in and kill them all. Don't let any of them come out. And so they killed them with the edge of the sword. And the guard and the royal officers threw them out. and went into the inner room of the house of Baal. And they brought out the sacred pillars of that. They destroyed not only the worshipers, but they destroyed this temple of Baal and the altar and so on. They also broke down the sacred pillar of Baal and broke down the house of Baal and made it a latrine to this day. And I looked that word up, and it works. It works. It wasn't used for anything else. Thus, Jehu eradicated Baal out of Israel. I thought that was quite interesting. Now, I just need to find my place here. 25, 26, and 27. Y'all excuse me. Okay, so now I want to back up a little bit and talk about Jehonadab. Who was this guy? Now, there's not a lot of information about him because it's from outside the Bible. Who is Jehonadab? He just suddenly appeared before Jehu and was, one of the lucky ones that Jehu didn't kill, or maybe he already knew him. And in 2 Kings 10 and Jeremiah 35, they're the only places that this guy's name is mentioned. So anything you find out about him is going to be, or most things, is going to be outside of the Bible. So Jehonadab met Jehu on the road, and he was with him when he had the worshipers of Baal killed. And part of his job apparently was making sure that there weren't any worshipers of Yahweh in the building. So who is this guy? Okay, John. Thank you. First, he was an ascetic. And yes, you heard me say that. He was an ascetic. Now, one thing that I'm beginning to understand is there are aesthetics that are bad that we read about in Colossians, but there are also ascetics that are good because the term really simply means, really stern in their beliefs. Okay, so this Jehonadab set standards and lived by them. And boy, he letter of the law. In his case, not only did he live by his rules, but so did his descendants. And God says something good about them. And God uses Jehonadab as a metaphor, showing how Judah and Israel did the opposite. They unlike Jehonadab's sons, they didn't obey every word out of their dad's mouth. They didn't observe all the things that Yahweh told them. They didn't observe the things that, I'm talking about Israel and Judah, all the things that God told them to do. So now we're going to read about Jehonadab's descendants here in a minute. Okay. I'm going back and forth, and I apologize. I'm going to have to throw this in here real quickly. Jehu killed the prophets of Baal, the worshipers of Baal. And so Yahweh says to Jehu, you've done well in executing what's right in my eyes. You took them out. And you've done to the house of Ahab according to all that was in my heart. You took them out too. And because of that, your sons of the fourth generation shall sit on the throne of Israel. That's what I was showing a few minutes ago, that Jehu and three of his sons sat on the throne of Israel. But verse 31 says something oh, I hate to use the word interesting, but I'm going to. It's interesting. But Jehu was not careful to walk in the law of Yahweh, the God of Israel, with all of his heart. He didn't depart from the sins of Jeroboam, which he made Israel sin. So here we've got two different things that have been going on in Israel. And we don't really get that until we get to here, or I didn't. Number one, all the previous kings allowed the people to worship whatever God they wanted to worship, whatever Elohim they wanted to worship. He wasn't like David and said, no, we're not going to have the Asherah poles. We're not going to have no worship of anybody but the one true God. But in the northern tribes, they allowed them to do that. Then, to make matters worse, here comes another type of worship, and that's the worship of Baal, which God made very clear, as if it were a light thing, that he allowed the people to worship the gods they wanted. He married Jezebel and let her bring Baal worship into Israel. Okay, so this is what God's saying to Jehu. You did good, and so I'm going to reward you. I'm going to reward your family a little bit, but you didn't go all the way. You didn't do everything that I wanted you to do. And so I have lost. I guess I didn't put it in there. Boy, this has been a good day. Anyway, that's okay. You all are used to me. Okay, I'm going to throw this out. Jeremiah 35, beginning in verse 13. Thus says Yahweh of hosts, the Elohim of Israel, go and say, and this is in Jeremiah, go and say to the men of Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, will you not receive instruction by listening to me? You won't listen to me? I'm going to give you an example here of what you should have done. The words of Jonadab, the son of Rechab, which he commanded his sons not to drink wine, are observed. You all wouldn't listen to me. You all wouldn't do what I wanted you to do, but Jonadab's sons did. So they do not drink wine to this day. They've obeyed their father's command. But I've spoken to you again and again and again, yet you've not listened to me. Also, I've sent you all my servants, the prophets. I mean, what else can I do to try to get your attention, Israel? And you sent them, and I sent them again and again, saying, turn, repent, every man from his evil way, and amend your deeds. And don't go after other gods to worship them. Then you will dwell in the land which I've given to you and to your forefathers. But you hadn't listened to me. I've tried over and over. I've sent prophets. I've sent kings. I've sent all kinds of stuff. But you wouldn't listen to me. But then the metaphor comes in, verse 16. Indeed, the sons of Jonadab, the son of Rechab, have observed the commandments of their father, which he commanded them, but you guys hadn't listened to me. Take a look at Jonadab. Take a look at his sons. They listened. They obeyed. Therefore, says Yahweh, the God of hosts, the God of Israel, behold, I'm bringing on Judah, talking about the south now, and on all the inhabitants of Jerusalem all the disaster that I've pronounced against them, because I spoke to them and they didn't listen. And I've called them, but they did not answer. In verse 18 of Jeremiah 35, then Jeremiah said to the house of the Rechabites, Jonadab's sons, thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, because you have obeyed the command of Jonadab your father, you've kept all his commands and done according to all that he commanded you. Therefore, thus says Yahweh of hosts, the God of Israel, Jonadab, the son of Rehab, shall not lack a man to stand before me always. Does that sound familiar? Does it sound like he mentioned something about that to a guy named David? He uses Jeremiah 35 as a metaphor and says, Jonadab's sons did what their father told them to do. They were loyal. They did exactly what he told them. You guys won't listen to me. So here's an example of what life could have been like if you had just listened to me. So, somewhere in this world are descendants of Jonadab, the son of Rechab. Somewhere, that they've had children and their blood's not pure and everything. Okay. Now, I hope I can find where I am. I'm looking for, boy, I hope I didn't leave all these out. Because if I did, I got a lot of stuff to cover. There we go. I apologize. This is what Jehu said before he took the worshipers of Baal in. Okay. All right. So he killed how many worshipers of Baal? We don't know, but it was enough to fill the house. And it pretty much wiped out the worship of Baal in Israel. Now we learn that there was more to cleansing pagan worship in the northern tribes than stopping Baal worship, which is what I was trying to tell you all a minute ago. Jehu continued to allow the people to worship the golden calves that Jeroboam had placed in Bethel and Dan. In other words, as king, he committed the sins of Jeroboam and allowed the people to continue to worship the golden calves of Bethel and Dan. What he didn't do was worship Baal, apparently. Jehu did not worship Baal. But because he did some of what God commanded, he would have these 4 descendants sitting on the throne. Let me see if I can find myself again. Yeah, here we go. Now, so Israel's been doing bad all this time. Israel's had prophets sent to them. They've been told, don't do this, don't do that, you need to do, and so they worshiped other gods, and many of them worshiped Baal. Okay? So as a result, now remember the prophecies we've talked about a little bit today. It says, in those days, Yahweh began to cut off portions from Israel. God did it a little bit at a time. Hazael, the king of Syria, defeated them throughout the territory of Israel. They started losing battles because guess what? God wasn't with them anymore. And they were defeated from the Jordan eastward, all the land of Gilead, the Gadites, the Reubenites, the Manassites, and so on. Now the rest, and okay, so he tells us, I'm starting the prophecy that I told you was going to happen Israel's going to be taken into captivity. So we can see here in verses 32 and 33 that he has started the process. And it says in verse,
Skip,
yeah, Barb.
the verse 32, according to my Bible, it says, the Lord began to reduce the size of Israel. I gather he's talking about population.
And territory.
Oh, okay.
Then he goes up. So thanks for that. Now the rest of the acts of Jehu and all that he did are in this book that we don't have a copy of. Are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel? You know, there's a piece or two in Chronicles, but that's not the book that apparently they're talking about. It says, and Jehu slept with his fathers, and they buried him in Samaria. Okay, so they considered him a good king. They buried him in Samaria, and Jehoahaz, his son, became king in his place. And it says that Jehu reigned for 28 years. So that's it. I have found chapter 10 to be full of so many different things. I really enjoyed, the research and the study of this chapter. So anybody else have any comments?
Well, I have one. Like Jeroboam, I wonder, Jehu was, well, he would kill people or was such a killer because he feared for his position as a king, maybe partly.
Yeah, and also what Mark had said earlier, he was preparing for war, apparently. Now I don't know if it apparently didn't ever get that far, but isn't that what you're saying, Mark? That all of that killing of the kings of the south was really a preparation for war?
Well, I think it was just part of a effort to subdue Judah.
Yeah.
Yeah, preparation for war, forays into that, possible area. I don't know why he didn't continue on with it, but he obviously wanted to subdue Israel, Judah, it seems like.
Yeah, and God may have stopped him. He may have had this big plan to go and subdue Judah and become the king of both countries. But anyway,
This guy seems kind of strange. He refers to Yahweh. He's wiping out the Baals, and part of that could have been political too, because they had been, aligned with his predecessor. But he still acknowledges God, but he doesn't get rid of those golden calves. That's
yeah, and I would lean toward that's who he worshipped. He doesn't seem to be a worshiper of the one true God. He seems to. Go ahead, Jim.
well, back earlier in here, when he was getting rid of the worshipers of Baal, he refers to Yahweh. I mean, he refers to Jehovah.
Yeah.
So, so maybe there is sort of some, what's the word for it? Is it syncretism between the calves and worship of Jehovah? Obviously, he did not worship Jehovah as he should, but
He seems to have known, and maybe God opened his mind up to realize this, but he seems to have known that Baal worship was, and I don't know if you can categorize, this is worse than this, but apparently based on what God said about about Ahab bringing Jezebel in. Apparently, Baal worship was worse because you had the child sacrifice and the the gods of the Baalites and so on. So anyway,
Yeah,
Yeah.
and those pillars that he took out and burned, they might have been Ashtoreth too.
yeah,
You know,
they may very well have been. Arthur, did I hear you?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. I wonder how many times in history has this basic scenario repeated itself? And I would think it would be many, many times indeed. As we were speaking about the destruction of the families in the leadership, the same thing happened in Russia when the Romanov family was slaughtered out of hand, because you have to destroy any possible inheritance to take place. And communism ruled and just totally destroyed the whole of the system that was under the Romanov family. So it seems to be that it's a thing that's repeated time and time in history, even up to relatively modern days.
Yeah, yeah. Fortunately, we don't kill our leaders and do coups anymore. At least in this country, I'm sure. Like you said, Arthur, though it's happened over and over and over in other countries. Okay, anybody else? Well, next week I just kind of glanced over chapter 11, and I don't think it's going to fit our normal criteria, but there's no way that I'm going to be able to pass over talking about Ahab's daughter, who was the queen of Judah. I, there's no way I can pass over that. So that's what we'll talk about next week, if that's okay with everybody. So, all right. Well, I enjoyed this one today. It was really a lot of fun, and Mark has influenced me to start using logos, um, and I'm using word search too, Mark. But I've got both of them set up on this computer, where if I run into a dead end on one of them because I don't know which button to push, I can go back to word search and do that. But I'm going to start taking their training courses and um, anyway. So all right, yeah.
I just kind of had a little side question. There's a few references to Jezebel, and I'm curious if this is another case of somebody having the same name more than two different people having the same name, or is it all the same person when they talk about Jezebel in First and Second Kings?
I think it's the same person. She was so evil, and she and her dad came down from Sidon. That was, I think, the Philistine area, if I'm not mistaken, and brought their Baal gods with them. So I believe it was the same, the one and the same. Anybody else?
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
I'd say my opinion is it's the same. It's, her name is mentioned 23 times, and outside of Revelation, it's only in First Kings and Second Kings in their tight things. Just sort of like Jeroboam was mentioned far longer after his death, but they're all referring back to something in his life. And I think the same kind of thing would be attributed to Jezebel.
Yeah.
Such a symbol it even endured to the book of Revelation.
So it's not just, another way of saying he married a bad person. It's a specific person throughout the whole thing then.
Yeah. That's why that's the way I look at it. And now in Revelation, it's a metaphor, or of this woman that was in I don't remember which of the churches that she was in, but they allowed Jezebel to to be in there causing trouble. I don't remember who it was, but so that
A lot of the references to her are actual, such as and Jezebel his wife said to him, but Jezebel his wife came to him. Ahab told Jezebel, those who eat at Jezebel's table. The Jezebel who killed the Lord's prophets. So they're all pretty specific. That's all in First Kings. And then in Second Kings, it's more of, I may avenge Jezebel, the blood of my servant, on Jezebel, the blood of my servants. The dog shall eat Jezebel. Your mother, the sorceries and whorings of your mother Jezebel are many. So I guess in that sense, it's kind of a lesson of morality, but it's still in reference to what she did. But they're pretty specific.
Yeah, until you get to Revelation. Is that the only place that it's metaphorical, Mark?
Well, mostly, I say.
Yeah. That's
Okay, thanks a lot.
all right. Anybody else? I wonder how many hung with us today. 14. I noticed that we had a few that left, but I think what several people do, which I think is a great idea, is they will come to our Bible study until it's time for them to leave for their regular church service, and I appreciate that. That's the whole point of this. As you all know, this study is for people who don't have a church that believes the way we do, that can, that they can get to. So, I think that's great. Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Mark, would you close us out today?
Father in heaven, we appreciate you being active in our lives. We just ask for you to give us guidance and direction. Heal us all in our minds and our bodies. And we just pray for your spirit for guidance in the decisions that we make and our actions. Help us to spread your truth to all that we come into contact with by our example and words. And we just pray that we listen to wise words, which says, preach the gospel always, and if necessary, use words. We praise your name and ask for your blessing. We thank you very much for our lives and look to you for guidance in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thanks. All right. Next week, it looks like we'll talk about Ahaziah, not Ahaziah, but Athaliah, who I'm sorry. I know I've said this ad nauseum, but I'm just still blown away that the daughter of King Ahab and wife Jezebel is reigning over the tribe of the nation of Judah for 7 or 8 years or something like that. So it'll be her turn next week. Oh, I see we've got some chats. Let's see, what do we got here? Okay, all right, that's it. Well, all right, folks.
Thanks a lot, Skip. It was a great day.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye.